Hey everyone, it's Audrey Miller again with Northwest Wisconsin Realty Team out of Hayward, Wisconsin. And today I'm joined by Renee from Nightberry Title. Renee, thank you so much for taking the time to come and chat with me today about all things title related. I think you'll find this video really helpful in terms of how the process works, maybe what sellers need to know about the potential costs of title insurance, and lots of other information that Renee has in store. So thank you for joining today, Renee.
Thank you, Audrey.
Tell me a little bit about yourself.
I'm Renee Strofe. I am the regional manager for Nightberry Title, so I cover pretty much all of northern Wisconsin. I've been in the title business for 30 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Not making yourself sound old at all.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
So I've been in it for 30 years plus, all from the start to end, owning my own title company, and now working for Nightberry for the last little over 10 years.
Okay. And I'll tell you what I love about Renee. She makes my life much easier. So I know when I order title through her, it's going to be done, it's going to be done right, and it's going to be done on time. So I appreciate that very much. So people who are watching may want to know, what exactly does a title company do?
So our job is pretty much a process. We handle everything from the start of the contract, signed contract, until closing documents are recorded.
Okay.
So all of the process in between stuff, meeting with seller, buyer, agents, producing a title commitment.
Okay.
So that's the process that a lot of people probably don't understand a whole lot about.
Right.
But the title commitment and the search itself is who legally owns the property, who can sell the property. Are there liens, mortgages, easements, anything on the property that everybody should be aware of or cleaned up prior to the actual closing?
Okay, that makes sense. And I might ask you a couple more questions about that process. So to begin with, so I'm an agent and I am working with a buyer, and we finally find the property that they want to purchase and we get an accepted offer. Then I, as their agent, if I'm the listing agent, I would reach out to you. If I'm not the listing agent on the property, then the listing agent would order the title work. And I think you had mentioned that one of the first things you do then is contact the parties involved. And how do you go about doing that? Is it by email, phone, and who are those parties in your transaction?
So we all know wire fraud and fraud in general is on an uptick. It's taken over all of our lives. So we have a couple things in place that protects, or we help protects fraud with any spoof emails or anything like that, because we're dealing with a lot of money regardless.
Right.
It could be $5,000, $100,000. So when we get that initial order, we reach out via email and phone.
Okay.
We always leave a voicemail if we don't have a phone, and then we start sending off some emails.
Sure.
Just so that you have our contact and things are secure.
Sure.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. So, and then you know, to kind of jump ahead in the process, or the next step, you talked about the title commitment. Can you speak a little bit more about what exactly the title commitment is? You mentioned you're looking for judgments, liens.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about that.
So a title commitment, again, it's the process. There's a lot of processes in what we do.
Okay.
But part of it is checking public record. So we check the Register of Deeds.
Okay.
Title insurance protects the buyer going backwards, not forwards.
Sure.
So everything in the public records we're going to find.
Okay.
Main thing, again, is the seller who's signing everything, the actual seller.
Right.
Do they legally have the right to sell the property?
Makes sense.
So we check the Register of Deeds, we check the county treasurer, we check the court's office, anything that we can get our hands on to get a little bit more information on the property, that's what we do.
Okay. And then you mentioned if there's judgments, liens, encumbrances, I guess would be another term. What are some examples of those on a property?
So most properties have mortgages. We're going to pull that up. One of the questions we ask sellers, regardless if we find a recorded mortgage or not, is do you have a mortgage? We all know that public records can have errors.
Sure.
Maybe a mortgage wasn't recorded, maybe it was indexed incorrectly, things of that sort. So once we find out if there are any mortgages, then we start working with the seller to make sure that we can get payoffs for it. judgments. Maybe there's a construction lien.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there's a money judgment. In that process, we check people's names versus what's recorded against the property.
Right, because there could be judgments that a person has that are under their name that need to be paid off at the time of closing, but may not be attached to the
Correct.
property. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Federal and state tax liens are two of those examples.
Okay.
Those are indexed against the name versus the property.
But have to be paid off at closing. And you as a buyer, you certainly don't want to be left holding the bag for something that the seller owed. So it's making sure that if you're the buyer watching this video, when you purchase the property, there is nothing owed against it prior to the day of closing.
Correct.
It'll be all taken care of at the day of closing.
Correct. Yep.
And then it would also show any easements, restrictions.
Yep. So easements, restrictions that are recorded. Now, sometimes you might run into unrecorded covenants.
Okay.
We can't insure against something that's not recorded.
Right.
So we will tell you what's recorded and what's a public record. Provide copies to you. You can take a look at it. Is it going to affect any building? You're going to check with zoning for that as well, but this will give you a good idea of items that may or may not be out there.
Okay. And I think that kind of brings me to my next question. When a buyer gets the title commitment from you, once you're done with that process, you will be emailing a copy to all parties involved?
Correct.
Yeah, okay. So when the buyer or seller gets a copy of that, but specifically talking to a buyer in this case, because they're the ones purchasing the property, they're the ones that need to know what might be out there. What should they look for? Because that title commitment is a number of pages long.
There is. Part of it is Schedule B2 exceptions. That's a good idea to look at. Are there easements on the property? Did you go walk the property? And there's power lines. Is there an easement? What does that mean?
Right.
What should I be aware of? Do I need to contact my attorney to give me a better understanding of do's, don'ts of an easement itself? But easements are a big thing.
Yes, and most of the items that would be, whether the mortgage, easements, restrictions, etc., they would be in the Schedule B exceptions page.
Correct.
Okay, so that's the main part. Not that they should, ignore the rest of
No.
it, but that's the main part to look at, because that will give you the details of that specific property.
Absolutely.
And anything recorded against it. Okay. And then who generally pays for title work?
In the state of Wisconsin, the contract clearly states that the seller pays for the title insurance.
All right. So unless there's been an adjustment to the contract done in the process of the offer to purchase, it would be the seller who would pay. That's the default. And people might want to know, if there's sellers watching this, they may want to know about how much does it cost for title insurance. There's also a state transfer fee. I do want to mention one thing before you answer that. The average sale price for a property in Sawyer County in 2023 was $320,000. So we're going to use that as an example of approximate costs. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
So on the seller's side, approximately $320,000. The title insurance itself and closing costs is probably going to be an estimated of $2,000, right around there. You will have the Wisconsin transfer tax on top of that. That's $3 per thousand. And then in Wisconsin, we pay taxes a little different than most states. We pay taxes 1 year in arrears. So there's going to be a tax proration on there. So that's a debit to the seller and a credit to the buyer.
And let's dive into this a little bit more, because this is actually a question that I get a lot, and a lot of people have confusion about this, because on the closing statements you will see which way is it, a debit
to the seller.
to the seller. So that is a cost. It is. It's a cost to them at closing, and it's a credit or a lowering of cost to the buyer. And I understand how it works, but we're paying it the following year in Wisconsin for the prior year. So right now we're in early 2024. If someone were to close, none of the 2024 taxes have been paid or billed out at this point.
Correct.
Because that won't happen until December of 2024.
Correct.
Okay, so give me an example. Let's say there's a property and the taxes, let's just make this real easy. The taxes for the year are $1,000. and we are at the end of February.
Mm-hmm.
So
The seller's going to they're going to see a debit
Mhm.
of the tax proration from January 1 to, in this case, February 29th
Mhm.
on the closing statement. So that's going to reduce your net funds at
Yes.
closing.
Yes.
That credit's carried over to the buyer,
Mhm.
and that's going to reduce their cost to close that they bring to closing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then what happens is that the next year when the tax bill is actually sent out, the buyer pays all of it.
Yep. Once that deed is recorded and that transfer is shown,
Mhm.
part of the questions that we ask when we're gathering information during our process is, where do you want the tax bill to go to the buyer?
Yes.
So once we input that, it goes to the state, goes through the different levels at the county. The buyer's going to get that tax bill for all of 2024,
Right.
due in 2025.
Correct. That's a very good explanation. I won't be surprised if I have to explain it another time to people, but that's a perfect explanation of how that works. So we kind of got a little into that part, but I wanted to delve into that a little more because that's a common question. But backing up a little bit so you have the title commitment, but then there's something that a seller typically pays for called gap insurance.
Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit about what that is and how that protects the buyer?
Yeah. So during our process, when I mentioned that we check public record, there's an effective date on your title commitment. That effective date is what day is the Register of Deeds, in this case, what day are they indexed and recorded through?
Okay.
So it's not always the same day. Most likely it's not the same day.
Sure.
There's been a couple counties that are weeks behind.
Okay.
So, for example, today is February 29th.
Right.
I could check public record. They're probably on February, probably 23rd or 22nd.
Okay.
So there's a gap between the time that the title commitment is actually researched and
Right.
the time that you close. So the gap insurance is checked. We check public record again
Okay.
72 hours prior to closing to make sure nothing is recorded or docketed, filed against the property that we need to be aware of.
Right. And because closing often takes 30 to 60 days. So you may have your title commitment completed within 10 or 15 days of the time it's ordered.
Correct.
But then there's another maybe 30 to 45 days until closing. So how long before closing do you run that search again?
So we'll check it 72 hours prior to
you
close.
said that.
No,
Yeah.
you're good. We're good. Most lenders, so we call it stale after 30 days.
Okay.
Most lenders will require us to check it again anyways because
Okay.
they see that as stale.
Sure.
There's a lot of things that could happen.
Yes.
Error or not. So it's just a good idea to check it.
Yeah, somebody could give their neighbor an easement and charge their neighbor $10,000 for an easement to his landlocked property in between the time you did the title commitment, and if you didn't do the gap insurance, would that be a good example of
It is, and
something
if
that
they
can
don't
happen.
disclose it,
Right.
how are you going to know? You're going
Right.
to get a final title policy, and then all of a sudden there's a new easement on there that you
Right.
weren't aware of.
Yeah.
What I recently, 2 weeks ago, dealt with is a seller has multiple properties.
Okay.
I was handling a sale. I didn't realize that they were selling another piece of property.
Okay.
Well, did my gap update, and they sold that. The legal description was wrong. I shouldn't say they sold that, but the legal description on the property that they sold before my closing
Okay.
had my legal description on it.
Oh my.
Yeah.
So, you would have been trying to sell the same property,
which would
that
have
they had just sold.
negated everything that I had. So I checked. It was a Friday closing. Checked on a Wednesday. Called the seller immediately.
Right.
And said, you need to get a hold of your attorney. We need some affidavit of corrections
Right.
done. I mean, it happens. Errors happen.
Yes.
So again, that's the importance of the gap check.
Right. Yeah, that makes total sense, and that protects you, the buyer, as you get ready to get your cashier's check or get your funds wired. So, and that's why you need the expert in your corner so that you don't run into something like that that got missed. So, I did want to ask. So you get done with the closing and everything. How long does it take for a deed to get recorded into the new buyer's name?
Sure. So at the closing table, I will give you a copy of what the seller has signed. If it's before the recording cutoff that day, the deed gets recorded that day.
Wow.
So yeah, we immediately mail the original out to
Okay.
the buyer.
All right.
If you lose it, no worries. We can always get you another copy. Once it's recorded, it's recorded.
Okay.
Anybody can pull that. It's
All right.
public record.
Public record on the county,
Yeah.
county sites,
Yeah.
etc.
But typically it's within 3 days, everything's recorded at our level, and then it goes through the county. It may take them a couple weeks
okay.
to actually change it over on the tax listers
Right.
or something like that, but
So someone might search the Sawyer County site a little bit later and be surprised to see it's not yet in their name. That doesn't mean there was a mistake. There's no issue. If you have that deed,
correct.
it is in your name. It just may take a bit for the county to get it updated on their
Correct.
records.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. And I want to ask, why should someone choose Knightberry Title?
Well, we've been in business for over 165 years. Knightberry has itself. We have hundreds of years of experts in our corner. Being all of the experts that we have, we get the deal done.
Right.
We can answer the questions. We have offices throughout Wisconsin
Okay.
and Minnesota.
Nice.
So the nice thing about that is if you're not here locally and you still have a closing scheduled, we can get you into another office or make it happen. I feel like with the technology that we have and the advancement that we have in technology, we're a step above everybody else.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
our experience and customer service does put us right up there.
Yeah, and I would agree.
Yeah.
And so, you know, what the situation is that we run into a lot of times, which Renee was just talking about, is a seller may have already moved out and they're in Green Bay, Wisconsin. The buyer's coming to do their final walkthrough and then they're going to close in Hayward. Those two parties can actually go into different offices of Knightberry, do their part of the paperwork, and it's all very seamless. I wanted to ask too, I think we kind of covered this, but do you have to be in person to close these days?
No, well, state of Wisconsin, we're a remote online notary state now, as well as Minnesota. We have a lot of tools in our toolbox to help facilitate a closing without sellers and buyers being present at the same time. We use a remote notary service that is vetted, first class notary.
Okay.
So if you're in California, we don't have any offices in California.
Sure.
I set up a notary appointment, get them the documents, they go and sign, get me the documents back.
And will they go to the person's house?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they come right to your door.
Anywhere.
Yeah.
Schools, Starbucks, wherever
Okay.
you want them to go,
All right.
we set it up. So it's a great
Very
service.
nice. Yes.
They're very reasonably priced, so we utilize it a
Yeah.
lot.
And there is
Yeah.
some documents in a transaction that do need what we call a wet signature. I don't know how you refer to it, but it can't be signed electronically. So an example of that is the actual deed.
Correct.
The seller has to sign it. Loan documents, a lot of times if the buyer is financing, those need a wet signature. So this is where the notary comes in. Instead of you having to print off those documents from your email and take them to a notary, you hire the notary service.
Yeah.
They come right to your house, and then they probably take care of sending it back as
They
well.
do, and that's why we handle that.
Sure.
We don't necessarily allow printing of your own and finding a notary
Okay.
because
Yeah.
of the tracking of it.
Sure.
As soon as we have it in our hands,
Okay.
we're good to go.
So if it's a remote closing, it will need to involve the remote notary that you set up.
Yeah, if you're not located in Minnesota,
Right.
Wisconsin, Florida, and we do have a branch in Texas.
Okay. So good chance if you're buying a property around Hayward, you're gonna have a Knightberry office close to you, even if you're from Minnesota and you're purchasing here or selling here. But if not, there are other options at your disposal.
Absolutely.
So try to make it simple for everybody,
We
right?
do, we try.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people who are buying a property have no idea that all of this is going on behind the scenes. So that's one reason I wanted to bring you in today and just kind of talk to you about that. So how can someone get a hold of you, Renee, if they'd like to use your title services?
Absolutely. So I'm Knightberry Title. I'm on Kansas Avenue here in Hayward, right across from Shoes Pond.
Okay.
You can reach out to knightberry.com. You can see all of our locations. My contact information is on there as well as other locations. Or call me. Call me right at my office at 715-634-9444. ask for myself and I'll get you taken care of.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for being here and listening to this today. I hope you found it helpful. Again, I'm Audrey Miller. I am a real estate broker here in Hayward, Wisconsin, and feel free to contact me anytime, and I'll have my contact information on this video as well. And subscribe or like my channel and follow along for more content and future information on anything real estate related and information on living in Hayward, Wisconsin. Thank you very much.
Thanks.